Hello everyone, welcome. I am Tim, aka Renfail, and tonight we're going to be talking corpse runs. This is the first time I've done this in a live setting, so we're going to be working through some kinks and having fun. There's a little bit of background noise going on here. It's not a controlled environment. I'm in an Airbnb here in Mexico City where we just moved, and we are currently getting set up with our apartment. So in the meantime, put this blog post up this morning. This is episode 9. Typically, we've done these over the past couple of months, put them up on YouTube. This time I wanted to take it in a live setting, test it out a little bit with you guys tonight and see where it goes. And tonight we're talking corpse runs and death penalties. More importantly, I think just kind of death penalties overall as opposed to simply corpse runs, because corpse runs are kind of an antiquated kind of system, and we are using them to some degree, but not to the same level of, say, EverQuest 1. So in the blog post we were talking about, if you go back to EverQuest in particular, that's probably one of the harshest versions of a death penalty out there, in the sense that it had experience point loss as well as all of your stuff getting left in your corpse. And if I'm not mistaken, it's been so long since the original EverQuest, I think at some point, if you didn't recover your items after a certain amount of days, it would eventually just rot and you would completely lose your items altogether. That's extremely hardcore. And I think that that's something that can drive players away. We actually saw someone on our Facebook page today that was talking about that's one of the reasons why he quit playing EverQuest after only 3 months, was because he kept dying in strange random locations and eventually got to the point where his gear would rot and he just said, screw it, I'm out. And I think that that's definitely something you want to avoid long term in terms of having some sort of corpse run or penalty in there. We actually think that a penalty is a bad word, but it is kind of the way to look at it, because it is, in some words, you are getting punished for playing poorly in some cases. But we kind of like to look at it as kind of like training wheels for playing a game. It's no different than when you're learning to ride a bike for the first time. You have training wheels, you use them, and eventually you take them off, you fall a few times, you scuff your knee, you get better, and eventually you don't fall over anymore and you can ride your bike. And then you move on to doing ramps and tricks, and if you want to take it to the half pipe, you can. But in the early stages, you're going to be falling down and scuffing your knees and learning how to ride that bike. And we've always kind of appreciated that aspect of a corpse run, because this is a really creaky chair, by the way. Apologize for that. We've always appreciated that because it kind of teaches you how to play the game. And there's some players that say that that's hardcore. You shouldn't be required to learn how to play. You should just be able to dive in, and everyone should be able to do anything at all times. And there are some truths to that, but it's also kind of a way for us to look at it and say, how can we inspire players to want to work together above and beyond just having a group-based game? Because that's all well and good to have group-based combat and to say that, you know, we don't want to foster solo play so much as we do the group element. We will have things for players to do on their own. But there's more to it than just the gameplay mechanics. And in terms of going out there and having adventures and questing and going out and exploring the world with your friends, there's also, you know, what happens when a player dies. And somebody brought up a very good point on Facebook today, was that they never liked corpse runs in EverQuest, not because of the corpse run factor, but because it never felt realistic when they had to go find their own body and loot their own body to get the items back. So when we started looking at how we wanted to incorporate corpse runs into our game, we very early settled on a system where, as opposed to leaving a corpse in the world, you basically fall unconscious and other players can bring you back into consciousness. And if not, you will basically fall unconscious and you'll wake up somewhere else at a bind point naked. And all of your stuff will basically be left on a tombstone, or eventually there'll be a backpack somewhere in the world. And the basic idea is that someone found you after you'd slipped into unconsciousness, but you were too heavy to drag with all of your gear, so they stripped you naked and drug you back to town, and then you have to figure out how to get back to wherever it was. And that's something that we feel encourages grouping and encourages making friends with other people, because it's something that theoretically, you're always going to be grouping up with a few people anyway, so those type of scenarios will be kind of rare. I kind of think just the way we've been testing right now in the pre-alpha, there have been deaths, but usually they're pretty few and far in between, and it's usually related to people rushing off into the depths of a dungeon without properly scouting out first. And so it's like, they pull back a whole bunch of spiders, and then the group wipes. And hey, Eloa, Adric, etc. Yeah, you like the painting? I kind of figured this is a groovy place to set up because it looked good in the living room. The only thing that's kind of weird in this particular Airbnb that we're at is because the chair creaks. And he's got a server rack in the pantry, which will go off every once in a while. The fan will kick on, and you'll hear it in the background. You'll probably hear it in the background right now. So anyway, yeah, I really like the painting. So I'll try to get one similar when we move into our own apartment. In terms of corpse runs being controversial, there was a really good article that I linked to in the blog post from Raph Koster, and he talks about why are corpse runs bad. And it's not that he thinks that they're inherently bad per se. And I like his opening paragraph when he talks about how people were categorizing corpse runs as a design error. And that's really not a fair assessment, as he put it, because corpse runs were just a part of kind of the natural progression of games. And in the early days, we had corpse runs in just about every game, and these days we pretty much don't. Even in, we've gone back, we're playing EverQuest 1 right now on the Agnar server with our Saga Lucima community, and they've removed corpse runs from the game, which was a surprise to us because we didn't realize that. And we went in, we were very cautious and very careful, and we eventually made it down to, I believe it was in Permafrost when we had our first group wipe. And we had gotten down to the king area and pulled a giant by accident, and he was, I don't remember how many levels beyond us, but very, very red. And we couldn't get him snared, and he took off, brought more giants, and we had a group wipe, and all of a sudden, we popped back to our bind points, but we had all of our armor on and all of our gear, and it was like this moment of awakening going, wow, EverQuest really isn't, a challenging game anymore, because once you've taken the corpse run out of the equation, there's a lot of the challenge that goes away when you're talking about the risk associated with potentially losing your gear. And that's, from our perspective, when we look at the corpse run and we look at, when you die, you leave your gear somewhere, it's less about it being a penalty. We don't see it as a penalty. We see it as an additional challenge to the game. There's an inherent risk associated with, being able to lose your gear somewhere. And that kind of inspires you to play the game better, to actually think about the actions you're going to be taking, to strategize with your fellow group mates, and to continually be planning ahead as opposed to just running off willy-nilly and pulling everything in the zone because you can AoE it to death, like you can in a lot of the newer games. But there are some downsides to corpse runs, and we kind of touched on that in the blog post about, for example, players who, the power goes out, or, your ISP drops. In those kind of scenarios, it's kind of unfair for a player to be, in those cases, directly penalized for something that's completely out of their control. But at the same time, how do we approach that? And how do we make it so that we can have it be fair across the board and take those kind of situations into consideration while also having the core mechanics in place that we want to achieve a challenging set of gameplay. And I think one of the earliest things that we felt was very detrimental and very hardcore about EverQuest 1 was, you could lose experience. And since we don't have experience points in our game, that kind of strips out of the equation, so you can't lose any levels. But there also is something to be said about, having your gear become permanently lost to you, and that's not a good thing. So, as we've talked in the blog post, we have an idea for, this is just an idea at this point, but having some sort of a faction-based series of goblins or something where they find your corpse, kick you out, and keep your loot. And if you want to get your loot back, or you want to get your stuff back, you have to pay them some sort of a faction currency or etc. But we want that to be something that's so expensive, or it's basically, we want players to always be looking to other players in terms of how to get their corpses back if they've died in the first place. Now, ideally, you won't be dying because of the fact that the functionality right now, the way it works in the pre-alpha, and I think everybody who's tested can claim to this, is that it's pretty rare for people to actually die because of the fact that you've got 8 people in your group and you can kind of put first aid on people or do a rune heal on them in combat and bring them back from the brink of consciousness. It's pretty rare for people to actually go beyond that point. I think the only times we've seen that has been, like I mentioned earlier, when people run off unprepared into the depths of the dungeon, or when we have scenarios where players accidentally click the release button and suddenly find themselves back at town naked and going, what the heck just happened? And that's something that, the onus is on us to make it more clear that you shouldn't be releasing, that you should be waiting for your group mates to revive you or to bring you back from the brink of consciousness. But I think the gist of what we're trying to achieve here is a system that does kind of inspire players to work together to avoid having these falls. You don't want to fall off the bike. You don't want to scuff your knee. You want to be able to ride proficiently. And to also inspire people to group together, to make friendships, to make alliances with people, and to become friends with people, and anything we can do to push in that direction in terms of having people come together for group-based gameplay is a good thing, and that's what we're trying to achieve here with this. It's not about penalizing players, and that's a hard thing for people to understand because the word penalty, when we're talking about a death penalty, it has a negative connotation. But what we're really looking for is we look at the positive sides of that and say the risk versus the reward versus overcoming the challenge of not dying, of figuring out how to play well within a group, and then taking that and moving forward in the game setting, whether it's in a dungeon scenario where you've got 8 people together or a raid scenario where you've got multiple groups playing together. How do you keep that challenge there without making the penalty so severe that players feel like it's a penalty? Because you don't want it to feel like that. You just want it to feel like, oh crap, And I'd actually urge people, if you haven't yet taken the time, head over to the forums. Adric actually posted a really in-depth kind of walkthrough of some of his points of view on how, kind of how it looks from a tabletop perspective versus an MMORPG perspective. And there's definitely some good nuggets in there in terms of things that we can be looking at as we're continuing to develop this system that we have in place, and figuring out how exactly we want the corpse runs to work with, keeping the challenge there, the risk, the group-based elements, while also trying to eliminate any sort of downside that will keep people from not wanting to play the game. Because the last thing you want is people to be saying, after 3 months, screw this, I'm going to quit, which is what we saw people talking about today on Facebook in regards to EverQuest. So, usually I keep these episodes around 15 minutes, and I'm kind of already approaching that length at this point in time. I know this is the first time I've done this live, so I'd love feedback from people, apart from the squeaky chair. We're still in the midst of looking for an apartment, so once we have that set in place, we'll be establishing a better schedule for this. Right now we're just doing them at 9 o'clock because that's when we're doing everything at 9 p.m. Later on this may change. I may do it at noon. I may do it on a Saturday. In terms of the interaction with people, the blog posts will continue to be posted on Mondays because it is the Mondays in MMORPG episodes, but we don't necessarily have to be discussing it at nighttime. We could be doing it any other time. We're also going to be doing a lot more other things once we get set up in the apartment, so I'd urge everybody, if you're not following the channel, please follow along. I appreciate all the follows. This is new. I just started this channel prior to moving here, and I'm going to be doing a lot of stuff here. We're going to be talking about Saga Leucemia. We're going to be doing writing workshop stuff. I'm going to be talking about the books as we're working through the books, working on quest line stuff. We're obviously getting ready to play Lord of the Rings Online starting tomorrow night with our community as we're researching how they did the book quests so that I can translate Volume 1 over. Wednesdays and Fridays we're doing EverQuest with our community. We're also going to be sneak previewing some stuff from Saga Leucemia. And then we've also got some other stuff in the works over at the Saga Leucemia channel where we're going to be starting a weekly developer diary series, which we haven't done since 2015, but that's going to be over at the Saga Leucemia channel, on that Twitch channel. Can't think of anything else off the top of my head. So thanks for tuning in, guys. I appreciate it, everybody's support. Stay tuned. We'll be coming to you live tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Eastern with Lord of the Rings Online, Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then Wednesdays and Fridays EverQuest. So till then, hope you guys enjoy. Let me know what you think. Don't forget to comment on the topic, the corpse runs. You can leave commentary over in the blog post. I left a link here in the Twitch channel. So check in. Thanks for tuning in. Catch you guys next time. Cheers.